So, teachers all across Ontario and education workers are on the picket line striking once again, and has caused a massive firestorm. Now, before people jump onto the wagon and assume that teachers are just being greedy again, that somehow they're, leeching out and this is just them, not caring for the students and more for themselves, let's backtrack for a second. Let's backtrack for a second because this is not just a random strike once again. Let's remind people that before COVID, before the pandemic, before kids were sent home to do e-learning, teachers were on the picket lines in 2019 and into 2020. They were on the picket lines because they were underpaid, underfunded, and had the most amount of kids. They were completely scrambled around. And Doug Ford and the Progressive Conservatives, the Premier of Ontario, completely tried to ignore the situation. And then COVID happened. So COVID kind of disrupted the teacher strike, told, teachers to work from home. Kids were forced to do e-learning online, told people to stay home. And, they could have went to the drawing board. They could have went to the table, both the teachers union and the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Education. They could have had discussions all through this. But because of COVID, they decided to hold it off. And you would think with 2 years of kids not being in the classroom, that would be the most appropriate time for teachers and the province and Queen's Park to have these negotiations. So when the chance that they do return to school, there wouldn't be a strike like this. But here we are, 2022, after not settling the strike in 2019, 2020, on top of COVID, on top of the pandemic, and on top of mass inflation that happened over 2 years, now we're seeing, once again, teachers on the picket lines. So, it's not surprising. It is not surprising. And that's why this is more of a continuation and not just another strike for another cash grab. So, here's what exactly is happening here. As reported from the Toronto Star here, it says CUPE, that's the union that's representing the public education workers. School workers are not backing down as Ford government asks Labor Board to end the strike. Some 55,000 members of the Canadian Union of Public Employees walk off the job Friday as the Progressive Conservatives ran through controversial legislation overriding their charter rights. This is the firestorm that's happening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's even made national attention, as you're about to see here. So, it goes on by saying school remains in a limbo next week for millions of Ontario students as their parents amid an illegal strike by support staff that also threatens Premier Doug Ford's shaky electoral coalition with private sector unions. As 55,000 members of the Canadian Union of Public Employees walk off the job Friday, holding protests around the province, including at Queen's Park, Education Minister Stephen Lecce hauled the union's leaders to the Labor Relations Board seeking a cease and desist order. So, they're doing everything that they can to override the powers of striking, the charter rights of, the freedom of assembly, which is constructed to the Canadian Constitution, the charters of rights, freedoms of rights of Canadians, trying to override that to shut this protest down. Rather than actually negotiating and getting to the drawing board and getting to negotiation and bargaining out a deal, they just want to override it. They want to override it and make this illegal and start charging teachers. This is where the big firestorm is happening. Immediately following proclamation of the Keeping Students in Class Act, and that's laughable because you'll see in a second, we filed a submission to the Ontario Labor Relations Board in response to CUPE's illegal strike action, Lecce said. Began late Friday afternoon and was set to continue into Saturday. Nothing matters more than right now than getting all students back into the classroom, and we will use every tool available to us to do so, the ministry said. That includes daily fines for workers up to $4,000 each and $500,000 for the union. A tally that could top up to $220 million per day. Now, if they had that kind of money, maybe that could go into the education system and actually make schools better, and they wouldn't have to go on strike. So where exactly is this money going to go towards if they start charging teachers for protesting, which is a right by Canadians? It's the part of Charters of Rights and Freedoms to be able to organize, to be able to assemble, and be able to strike as a worker, as a working Canadian. You're allowed to do that as part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which the Ford government is trying to override. Where exactly are those fines going towards then? If you're going to start charging teachers and start charging people that are fighting for their worker rights, where's that money going to go towards? If you're going to start fining teachers for trying to get negotiations back on the table, which you've ignored for almost 3 years. You've ignored for almost 3 years, and it's happening once again. The Ford government should not be surprised that teachers are still fed up, especially now because the fact that we're past pandemic, inflation has skyrocketed, things have not changed since the last time, and they're continuing not to change. They're ignoring everything that they can to get to the bargaining table, which kind of goes against the purpose of keeping kids in the classroom. Just saying. Letch's comments come the day after Ford's progressive conservatives ran through controversial legislation overriding charter rights and imposing a 4-year contract on school support workers with annual raises up to 2.5%. Among those rallying at Queen's Park is in a festive protest were leaders and members of other public and private sector unions just 4 months after Ford was reelected with a big blue-collar machine push that successfully courted unionized workers. Lena Payne, president of Unifor and the most powerful private sector union leader in Canada, said that up to $100,000 was being donated to help Cube pay its fines. Payne predicted Ford would regret his assault on trade union freedoms for all workers across Canada. So, this is the big firestorm controversy that's happening along with this, is that they're using everything they can to override workers' rights to protest, to strike and organize and try to bargain with their union and bargain with the government as public employees. They're trying to override that and try and dismantle it completely as possible without ever having actual negotiations or talks or anything like that, which kind of it's downright disgraceful. It's downright disgraceful for relations between the province and its workers. It's downright disgraceful and disregarded. So here's where this gets interesting, though, because now this has made national attention, because Justin Trudeau has something to say about this. And this is where this gets funny. As CTV News Toronto points out, Trudeau calls out Ontario's use of notwithstanding clause to prevent education strike. So this is the phrase that you hear a lot about this, the notwithstanding clause. And I thought I took the time to actually find the definition so that people can understand exactly what this entails, because this is what Ford is trying to implement when it comes to these teacher strike, is the notwithstanding clause. So I looked it up on the Canadian Encyclopedia, which I didn't even know existed until now. And the notwithstanding clause So this is Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, is known as the Notwithstanding Clause, also known as the Override Clause. This is part of the Constitution of Canada. The clause allows federal, provincial, and territorial governments to temporarily override or bypass certain charter rights. These overrides are subject to renewal after 5 years. Although the clause is available to governments, its use is politically difficult and therefore rare. I wonder why. Maybe because workers would then be pissed off at the government and they could lose their electoral respect, which is what Ford is now worried about. Because now he's losing all these big, blue-collar workers that got him reelected. There's that, big blue-collar workforce that got him reelected. And now he's overriding union workers' rights to try to shut all this down and not get to the negotiation table, which they should have done for 3 straight years. This is a continuation. This is not just a randomized strike that just happened on this day. This is rehashing what happened in 2019 and into 2020 that they completely ignored and put it on the back burner, and now things are getting worse. Because we're post-pandemic. Kids are getting back into the classroom. We're finally getting some normalcy back to things, but we also have skyrocketing inflation. And not responding to 2019 is getting worse for 2022. That's why they're striking. That's why this is happening. It is also colloquially known as the nuclear option. Imagine if they said that on the news, that Doug Ford is going nuclear on the teachers. Imagine the kind of response that would get. Because its use considered extremely severe. Since the Constitution was purchased in 1982, the clause has been only used a handful of times by various provinces. The federal government has never invoked the clause. Now, that may be a true point, but here's where this is laughable and why Trudeau is exposing his own hypocrisy. Because you remember the truckers' strike. You remember when the infringement on truckers and essential workers during the mandates and the lockdowns and how they were forcing people out of their jobs, out of their livelihoods, and shutting down bank accounts if they did not comply with national orders that were in line with Big Pharma agenda. So, the fact that Trudeau is calling out Doug Ford for his in-use of the with not standing clause, for his override on teachers, is downright laughable, because it's exposing Trudeau and his hypocrisy and how he used the exact same formatting, the exact same legal proclamation to try to override essential workers like truckers that now he's getting held accountable for. Because now there's a public inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act that he's trying to impose on the trucker strike, on the convoy, the peaceful convoy that went through Ottawa to remind us that the mandates were just a form of tyranny and nothing really to do with the COVID science. There was no scientific claim, no scientific evidence. Doctors even declared that this was outright ridiculous, and there was thousands upon thousands of people that supported the trucker convoy. And Justin Trudeau used the Emergencies Act, which is something that the Canadian government has never used on its own population. The Emergencies Act is designed for tactics of war. Unless there's a war that broke out at Parliament and there's a national security threat at hand, the Emergencies Act has never been used, but now they used it on the Canadian public and their workers. So that's where the hypocrisy comes in. That's where I get a huge laugh out of this. And that's why it goes to show you that whether it's the federal government or the province, both sides are pretty much anti-worker when you really look at it. And this has caused a lot of controversy. This is obviously going to get into next week. And, you know, I feel bad for parents that are trying to scramble around to figure out what to do with their kids, because you're working, you know, 9 to 5, you're working, you know, heavy stated jobs. Like I understand the struggle. I understand the struggle, but at the same time, this is kind of the point of striking. This is kind of the point of why workers strike and why there's walkouts and why things get shut down. It's supposed to cause a ruckus. It's supposed to interrupt your life. It's supposed to make things challenging, because if there is more interruption and more challenging, then parents who are concerned about their kids and going to school and wondering what's up with the school is going to get concerned about this, and is going to call out the government, is going to call out the unions and say, why aren't you guys getting to the bargaining table and figuring this out? Why are you not doing this? That's what people are starting to realize and understand here. And it's even gone to media attention, as you can see here. So this is on breakfast television in Toronto. And it's surprising that a morning show is able to have the courage to say something like this. And maybe it's because it's Sid Cicero. I hope I said his last name correctly. Maybe it's because he's a sportscaster. He works for Sportsnet, but now he's also hosting the breakfast television in Toronto. Maybe because he's a sportscaster and it's very hard to sway a story when you're talking about sports. I mean, you don't start a segment with, hey, the Blue Jays were playing against the Cubs, and the Cubs say they won 5-4. The Jays say they won 5-4. I guess we'll never know. Back to you, Mike. It's very hard to do that in sports. So maybe that's why he's, you know, taking the time and has the genuine courage to speak out for this. But listen to what he has to say. Listen to what he has to say about the teachers and the education workers, and the kind of how Doug Ford, who was supposed to be this big jobs union guy, he was supposed to, you know, bring the blue collar working Canadians aligned together and bring jobs back. And, you know, we're going to restart the Ontario economy after, you know, months and months of lockdowns and COVID. Watch the response that he's going to give here. Take a listen.
I'm angry. I'm really angry. I'm looking at some of the lowest paid public sector employees we have in this province. And Doug Ford just took out the biggest baseball bat he could find and went to town and acted like none of us were going to notice. Stephen Lecce, I thought, was handling that really tough press room very well. Lecce's way smarter than Ford. It's not even close. It's not even close. Ford wouldn't show his face in that room. Lecce at least went in there. And I heard kids need to be in class. Kids need to be in school. We need our education system to continue. We can't go backwards.
Now, I can agree with the messaging. I can agree with the messaging that kids need to be in the classroom, because as the science has proven, and doctors were proving, and researchers and psychologists were proving, that the lockdowns were hurting kids. They were hurting their kids with their social skills. It was hurting kids with, you know, cooperative skills. They weren't getting the same result of education as they would with online learning as compared to being in a classroom setting with teachers. So I agree with the messaging that, yes, we need to get kids into school and have proper education and actually get teachers involved with their kids and so on and so forth. But because Stephen Lecce, being the Ontario Minister of Education, aligned itself with Doug Ford and the administration of Ford Nation, to coin his phrase, it was all just a trope. It was all just a trope, and you're going to see here why that was. But let's hear the rest of this.
Need to do this. My favorite. Parents want their kids in class. We did research. Right, and I'm 20 pounds overweight, and the sky's blue most days in Toronto when the fog isn't around. They had one job since June. This government, after getting elected, they had one job, was to keep kids in school. Where are the kids today? I've been in this business 20 years. I know what incompetence is, and I know what incompetence looks like. When you can't do your job, you are incompetent. Kids aren't in school today. When people can't do their job, they lose it. This government has no idea what it's doing. None. None. I'm angry.
So I'm pretty amazed that this was said again on morning television, breakfast television in Toronto. I'm surprised that a morning talk show is able to have the courage and stance to say the words they say. And he's absolutely correct that what they are doing, and it's debatable whether it's incompetence or not. And yes, a lot can be said about the incompetence of the Canadian government, both, the Ontario government and the federal government. There's a lot of, you could fill the incompetence with a friggin' shovel and throw it into a cliff and fill it up with incompetence. But this is where this gets even more interesting, because digging through some stories, I pulled up this, and this could be why they tried to ignore this in 2019. Because like I said, this is more of a continuation of the strike of 2019 than it is just another random strike. Because teachers did not get a good bargain afterwards. They didn't negotiate the strike. The strike did not end. It was postponed. They postponed it because of COVID. They told people to stay at home, lockdown. Kids were going to be, homeschooled online, and teachers are going to have to, resort to computers and software and stuff like that. It was put on hold. And this is where this gets really interesting. And not in a good way. Maybe interesting is not the best word to say. This is where this gets really revealing. Doug Ford wants Education Ontario to be more like Education Alabama. Here's why that's a bad idea. The Ford government's plan to bring Alabama-style e-learning to Ontario would damage education system, education experts warn. So this is something to be said about all this, and why people did not really believe the whole idea of getting kids back in the classroom, considering that they're underfunding schools, they're shoving kids into these massive class sizes, and teachers are getting so overwhelmed, they're getting underpaid, understaffed, underemployed, and nothing's being negotiated to actually maintain schools and their health and their safety and security. Nothing is being done for the education system. And maybe it's something to do with this, and something to do with the fact that we had COVID lockdowns for 2 years and told kids to go, online learning. And they just try to teach kids at the masses, which all education experts, teachers, psychologists, everybody has made points about the fact you can't do that. Kids learn at different rates. You can't just produce the masses and expect a kid to, learn offhand. So this is really revealing. And this is from Press Progress in, I think it was 2020. Yeah, January 15, 2020. So before even the lockdowns happened, because I think the lockdowns were like end of February, March. So this is when the teachers were originally on strike. They dove down into this. And it says Doug Ford's plans for education, which includes eliminating several thousand teacher jobs and replacing them with American-style online learning courses, could do great damage to Ontario's education system, experts in online learning say. This week, the Toronto Star obtained a secret document exposing the Ford's government's plans to cut education by progressively increasing enrollments in cheap e-learning courses, with the goal of allowing teenagers to obtain high school diplomas entirely online by 2024. So, is it really incompetence, or was this all structurally planned? Was this all structurally planned, And the fact that they try to put this on the back burner, try to pretend that, oh, because the COVID pandemic, we can't mention about teachers, we can't mention about education because there's a virus out there and we have to hold that off as long as possible. But now, since the kids are back in school, things have not changed. Nothing's been negotiated. Nothing's been talked about. Yeah, they're going to strike. Yeah, they're going to go on protest. Yes, schools are going to be shut down. Because you ignored the system for almost 3 years. And we have massive inflation. We have skyrocketing crisis after crisis after crisis. Things are happening out in the open. And of course, teachers are going to be striking about it. So it's pretty much perpetually planned. The Ford government announced plans last year to make students complete 4 mandatory online courses in order to graduate starting school this year. Ford's education minister, Stephen Lecce, has defended the move by noting several Republican-held U.S. states already having mandatory e-learning. I love how our system, and I always make a joke about how America is like our, bratty kind of brother or bratty sibling, that, we're kind of the more mature kind of sibling. I'm really shocked that the Canadian system, that our Canadian politics, goes to resort to places like Alabama to figure out their education system, and not to places like, I don't know, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, all those countries where scientists are, coming from, where they're winning Nobel Prizes, where they're doing advanced research and doing amazing technological work. Like, how come we don't investigate those countries that have the top leading education systems in the entire planet? And it's working. It's proven that their system is somehow excelling student success. It's excelling people's reputation. And like I said, you look at the data, you look at the analysis, something's obviously working over there. Why are we not taking notice of that? Like, why are we taking a step backwards and going to Alabama, out of all places? No jokes on Alabama. I'm sure you got nice, kind people over there. Just saying. Lecce has pointed to Alabama and Arkansas as good examples of the education model he wants to import to Ontario. And where exactly is the results that show that they are good examples? Where's the data? Where's the analysis? He's saying that they're good examples. I don't see where the data. Show me charts. Show me some graphs. Show me the research that actually proves that these 2 random states are somehow beneficial to students' learning. Because as we saw with the pandemic, doing online classes is not helping kids. Is not helping kids whatsoever. I think COVID has already proved that. The COVID pandemic proved that e-learning is not beneficial for kids. Because you can't physically mass produce learning and educate people in the masses, because kids are different. They learn different styles. That's why that's that whole visual, kinesthetic, audio visual learning styles, you used to do as a kid. I had courses of it in high school and college, and anyway, but many experts say that would be a very bad idea. The U.S. has a lot of virtual schools that are publicly funded private entities that really just make a profit from the enrollment of students in e-learning. University of Toronto researcher Bian Farndy told Press Progress. And I see it all the time. I see it all the time. What's that one that always keeps spamming me for no reason? PragerU. Trump University. They're not actual campuses. They're not actual institutions where you can actually go and sit on at a lecture. It's all online. All online. And that's where they want to put education towards. They want you to buy the bullshit and put money down on a scam. because it's not actually beneficial. You don't actually gain or learn or experience or actually get any results of those institutions. And they're trying to push that onto Ontario, and they've wanted to do it for years. And COVID, the pandemic, has proven how bad that really is. How bad it really is that teachers are scrambling around to try to teach kids virtually, how it didn't really make sense, how rural communities that don't have internet access get completely left out of the situation. And, you know, you had the minister, Stephen Lecce, is supposed to be the smart guy and understands, you know, kids and learning and stuff, but he doesn't have grasp or understanding of the concept of how this is psychologically bad for young kids. And why he's pointing to 2 random states in the United States. 2 random states for good education when there's entire countries that are succeeding ahead of us. Nordic countries, Korea, Japan. There's entire countries. You look at even Europe and their education system. It's way excels hard, way on top of ours. We're down somewhere in the median of the list, and the United States is even further down. So why are we not looking at good examples then? Why are we just picking and choosing random, you know, states and different e-learning courses saying that's a good idea when there's actually good examples in the world? And I like to know when the what kind of scientists and Nobel Prize winners come out of Alabama or Arkansas. No offense. I'm sure there's very nice people there. But there you go. That's something revealing to all this. And how this is not just, oh, teachers are being greedy. They already have so much. Yada. They're just in it for themselves. And how it's not really the incompetence of the Ford government, which there's a lot of incompetence. This is more structurally planned, and why this is a bigger deal than most people realize, and how this is going to be affecting your kids and your kids' kids and the entirety of education in the province of Ontario, and how they're trying to use legal action and tyranny to try to demonize your fundamental rights as a Canadian. The freedom of assembly and the freedom of protest and the freedom of speech. Trying to override that and silence people out. Then not going to the negotiation table, which they should have done 3 fucking years ago. That's the thing. That's the big picture. That's what people need to get through this. And why people are cheering more on to the teachers at a time like this than ever before. Because Stephen Lecce and Doug Ford had all this time to negotiate, all this time to figure shit out. They had 2 years of lockdowns that they could have talked to the union, they could have sat down and figured this shit out. Once kids got back to school, let's figure out how we're going to pay our teachers, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. They didn't do jack shit. And now they're surprised that teachers are protesting after 2 years of a pandemic and mass inflation. They're surprised by that. And they're so petrified that that's why they're trying to do the with not standing clause to violate individual Canadians' rights and freedoms. Which is kind of authoritarian insanity. This is the tyrannical shit that Justin Trudeau was known to do during the trucker strike. And now Doug Ford's doing it to teachers. Are there any real pro-worker politicians, even in this country? I know it's hard to find pro-worker politicians in America. I know that for sure. But I thought we were supposed to be different. I thought we were supposed to be a step ahead. And not look to America for, you know, their bad examples and copying it to here. I thought we were supposed to be a little smarter than that. You know, learn from actual good examples and not just piggybacking on corruption that the states have been doing for years. It's just downright disgusting, degrading, and it's again, Doug Ford railed on, got reelected from blue collar workers, and now it's interesting to see those same blue collar workers going against him because he's going against workers' rights.